Tempest is one of my all-time favorite arcade games, and I played it a lot in the 1980s. So when Arcade1Up released its Atari 12-in-1 cabinet skinned for Tempest, I quickly added one to my arcade. One thing I really wanted to add to this cabinet was Atari's signature Volcano buttons. The lighted cone-shaped player start buttons were featured on the original 1980s game. When I purchased my Dig Dug cabinet, it came with Volcano player buttons, so I was determined to add the same thing to Tempest. Modification parts seller Retro530 makes a Volcano button installation kit for Arcade1Up games. While the kit doesn't include the buttons themselves, it does include the wiring harness, cabling, and splitter needed to power the LEDs from the game's 12-volt power supply. The kit also includes button inserts, making it possible to install the smaller Volcano switches into the 28mm holes Arcade1Up uses on their games. Laramie from Retro530 mentioned that I could find the buttons from Arcadeshop.com. This vendor offers repair parts for full-sized arcade machines, and they stock both the Atari lighted buttons as well as the cone-shaped bezels that give them their Volcano look. The Atari buttons include the switch and LED in a single housing. It has a narrow threaded collar that accepts the cone bezel. The button inserts from Retro530 are 3D printed parts and feature a molded cup that holds the Atari switch in alignment. When the cone bezel is threaded onto the button, it locks the assembly together for installation in the deck. Since I was going to have the game apart, I also ordered an angled deck kit from eBay seller A1Up Nut to give the controls a more ergonomic tilt. The original Tempest game had a curved waterfall-style deck. And while I'd love to buy one of the custom-made decks made by mod1up.com, I can't afford one at the moment, and so in the meantime, I thought I'd try the Angle Deck Kit. It includes a pair of 3D printed wedges and some new mounting hardware. To begin the project, I removed the control deck and placed it atop two wood blocks on my workbench. The blocks elevate the deck and protect the controls when inverted. After removing the plastic dust cover, the first step was to remove the original player start buttons. To remove a button, squeeze the two locking tabs on the side and push it down out of the hole. Use a small pliers to remove the wire clips. Next, I installed the button inserts. Be aware that these have alignment tabs along one side that must correspond to the alignment slot in the buttonhole. Line up the tab and then press the insert into the hole until it clicks into place. After slipping the Atari switch into the plastic insert, I screwed the cone bezel on to lock the unit together. The switch has a total of 5 wiring tabs on the back. The 2 broader tabs along the side are for the 12-volt LED connections. The 3 smaller tabs are for the switch itself. Be aware that this switch has 2 configurations. For this installation, you'll want the normally open configuration, meaning you have to press the button for it to make contact. Selecting the 2 tabs shown here will produce this effect. The mounting sleeves on the Arcade1Up wires fit the switch tabs perfectly. With the first button in place, I repeated my steps to install and wire the second one. Next, I installed the power harness. You can only power LEDs one way for them to work. After making the connections, I made a test by plugging the game's 12-volt power supply directly into the harness. The LEDs lit as they should, but if they don't light on your first attempt, swap the wires to the tabs and try again. Next, I drilled a 3/8-inch hole through the plastic dust cover and inserted the 12-volt power wire through it. I then replaced the cover on the deck. Note, the extra black and red wires shown here go to buttons on the 3D printed coin door that I added to this machine in an earlier video. Before reinstalling the deck, I added the angled deck kit. The plastic wedges are made to rest on top of the deck mounting blocks. In testing them, they tended to move out of position while trying to install the deck, so I tacked them in place using a bit of DAP latex caulk. I inserted the deck screws temporarily to make sure that the screw holes lined up properly. After giving the caulk about 15 minutes to set up, I installed the deck. The kit includes 2 lengths of screws and finish washers. The shorter screw goes to the front of the game. Back to the buttons, the Retro530 installation kit comes with all the power connections, including splitter and 2 adapters to tap into the game's marquee power supply. I plugged one end of the splitter into the LED harness, then added the 2 adapters to the remaining ends. One plugs into the marquee power socket and the other plugs into the marquee itself. With everything in place, I powered up the game. The Volcano buttons light up at the same time the marquee does. I tested the buttons to make sure that they would launch the game properly, as well as I held the Player 1 button for 5 seconds to test the cabinet's return to menu function. The Volcano buttons add a little more flair to an already cool cabinet. and they compare well to those Arcade1Up used on its Dig Dug game. As you can see here, while I was at it, I installed a new marquee, also from Retro 530. Installing the Volcano buttons was an easy modification. It required me to drill a single hole in the dust cover, and the rest of the project was strictly plug and play thanks to the installation kit. For more easy Arcade1Up mod projects, check out my other videos on YouTube. And if you like my work, consider subscribing to my channel, Pop Art Studios.